But we're going to go to our guest now, who has been at the RNC. I think he's still there right now. And he is Chuck Johnson, founder and editor of gotnews.com. Again, he's basically a political bulldog, reviled by the left, banned by Twitter. We're going to talk about Twitter censorship later. But Chuck, welcome to the show. And I just want to get your initial reaction. You probably haven't had a chance to read much about it. But there appears to be a new massive terror attack that's taking place in Germany. What's your initial reaction to this?
It's not the least bit surprising. I mean, it's surprising that people are surprised now. I mean, we have a bunch of savages who have moved into a population. That population is increasingly having fewer and fewer children, while that larger population is having more and more. And so it's just a matter of time before Germany winds up abolishing itself. In fact, there's an interesting book by Thalo Sarrazin, which I'm thinking of getting translated into English, or working to get translated into English, which is essentially predicting the collapse of Germany. And I think it's just a matter of time before it finally collapses altogether. And I think it'll probably be Germany or Sweden that first either elects or appoints a Muslim leader. And it seems that there's sort of no hope at this stage. And the advice I'd give anyone who is in Europe is to emigrate immediately.
I mean, that's what Milo's basically considering at this point. He calls himself a gay refugee from Europe. The situation you outlined there, where governments are overtaken by Islamists, that's what Michel Houellebecq outlined in his book, Submission. He predicted that it might be coming to France, but as you said, Sweden or even Germany at this point seems the likelier candidate. We had the head of French security, the head of French police, saying one more mass molestation or a couple more terror attacks in France, that would cause civil war, that would cause civil unrest. Do you think that's a likely outcome, that the population would get that angry to the point where they would be out on the streets? I mean, we saw it in Nice to some extent, a different reaction to Paris. It wasn't hug a Muslim. They were angry. They were booing and heckling the prime minister. Do you think it's actually plausible that this would lead to actual civil unrest, or are people just going to continue to stick their heads in the sand until we're all wearing burqas?
Well, on the micro level, it's very, very hard for people to actually decide what to do. I mean, the government has essentially taken the position in France that the migrant flows into Europe are like migratory patterns of birds. There's no political will to stop the flow. There's no military sufficient to actually stop the flow. And there's no real desire in terms of revealed preference to actually do something. And, you know, it's interesting. I've been studying and reading about the collapse of Lebanon in the last few weeks. And it's worth studying if you're a European, because it was a very peaceful country at one point. Beirut was the sort of Paris of the Middle East. And now it's descended into civil war. And how did that happen? Well, what happened is that the Muslims had more children and they overran the Christian minority. And then they continued, they started to dominate them. And that's more or less what's happening right now in Europe. And of course, the Europeans are increasing the problem by continuing to provide very generous welfare benefits and essentially having a dual system if you're a Muslim versus a non-Muslim. And it could happen here in the United States as well. Fortunately, we're such a large country. It's a bit harder to do. But I must tell you, when I was in Australia recently, I saw several large mosques in Sydney. It was quite shocking. And so this is a problem all throughout the sort of former British Empire and, of course, all throughout Europe. And until there emerges a very strong leader who could actually do something about it, I think we're in for a very, very difficult time. And I'm surprised at how routine occurrences are becoming. It's a bit like weather patterns or something like that, where people are just so numb to it. Where there's somewhat of a defiance where people boo their president, but they don't take it beyond that. They don't think about ways to limit Muslim flows into the country. And they probably, there's a despair setting in throughout Europe that is very, very discouraging.
I mean, there has been this rising conservatism. Over the past 2-3 years, we've had the AfD party in Germany. We've had Marine Le Pen gaining success in France. They've got their presidential election next year. Of course, we've had the rise of UKIP in the UK. We've had Brexit. So at least there seems to be some shift politically, as you said, for somebody to step forth and deal with it. But when there's literally an attack now every few days in Europe, it's getting completely out of control. We're going to chime back in with updates from Munich, but you were at the RNC, I believe you're still there. You had a little run-in with Jaime Weinstein, I think his name is, which is Michelle Fields' boyfriend. Michelle Fields, of course, being the former Breitbart reporter who was the victim of this, brutal attack by Corey Lewandowski, where he ripped her arm off and beat her to death with it. Well, no, actually what happened was he lightly brushed her, but the media made such a big deal out of it. It was completely insane. You spotted Fields outside the RNC. You tried to ask her a question. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I went with several friends of mine, and we went up to go ask them a question. We followed them down the street. I turned to go and ask them a question, and Jaime Weinstein immediately lunged out at me and essentially hit my arm extremely hard. I'm not a particularly physically fit guy, as everyone can see in the video, and so it actually did hurt. I mean, we're hoping to just ask them a question about why they had continued to make things up over the years, why they had continued to lie about what happened with Corey Lewandowski, why they had lied about me. And it's interesting how quickly Jamie's demeanor changes when he realizes he's on camera. It's quite a revealing kind of thing. First, he tells me to go, fuck myself. And he says, kindly step away, sir. Once I told him, it's all on camera. You're busted. Like this, it's kind of violent behavior. My lawyer wants me to send a letter to him and his employer, essentially laying out, that it was an assault. I don't know yet if I'm going to do that. It was very strange, though. I mean, I didn't really think Jaime Weinstein had it in him. He of course accused Corey Lewandowski and Trump of being thuggish, and yet his immediate reaction to dealing with me is violence. That was very surprising because, but not out of character. I mean, he had been wandering around the RNC, picking fights with reporters, being quite drunk, and so it's a little disappointing to see him resort to violence. But what can you do?
I mean, and we can see the video, we're playing it now as you speak, and he immediately escalated the situation. It's not as if he verbally tried to tell you to back off. Maybe he did for a split second, but he immediately resorted to violence, which way outstripped anything that Michelle Fields experienced at the hands of Corey Lewandowski, right?
Right. I mean, it's sort of absurd in a way. And in all honesty, my arm actually really, did kind of hurt and still kind of hurts a little bit. It was interesting. It was very revealing of their character as a couple. Of course, Michelle Fields and Corey Lewandowski have since gotten engaged, and they've essentially tried to become sort of e-celebrities on the internet. And they're, of course, they falsely accused me of hacking their computer, or of hacking Michelle Fields' computer. She's falsely accused a number of people. We broke a lot of these stories at Got News. We also looked into the financial incentives that Michelle Fields' family might have for being anti-Trump, such as her mother and aunt's anti-Trump views. Her mother makes money from essentially resettling Honduran immigrants in the United States. Jaime Weinstein's, who essentially is a trustafarian. He has a sort of tenuous relationship with the Daily Caller, where he essentially pays money to have all these bookers place him on TV personally. And so he's sort of a trust fund kid. They're both trustafarians. And they're sort of probably not used to just having people ask them questions. And of course, I've had a number of hostile people try and ask me questions here. Although surprisingly, a lot of people have been high-fiving me and thanking me for my work. But there's a proper way to deal with it, which is to just maintain your calm and your composure. But the fact that Weinstein immediately resorted to violence is, I think, revealing of how he's really quite thuggish.
I mean, he's a bizarre character. I remember, I think it was back in 2008 at a Bilderberg conference. He was acting as this kind of weirdo stalker, trying to troll Alex Jones, trying to ask him questions. Alex was just walking away, and he just kept getting in Alex's face. So, he treats you as some, dangerous threat when you simply try to ask a question. Yet he's done exactly that and more on previous occasions. Extremely bizarre character, as he said. He's kind of a hanger-on at the Daily Caller, which in general is a good publication. It's bizarre that he still gets all this attention. We're going to go to a break soon, though, but we're going to come back and talk about Twitter censorship. Of course, yesterday, Milo had his Instagram account briefly suspended. That came back. Now this has escalated. We've got WikiLeaks coming out and saying they're going to talk about building a new social network, which is actually centered around free speech. Other people have suggested that in the past. Other people have criticized the idea. They've said, well, what's the point? We need to fight them on their battleground. Simply preaching to the choir on our own battleground isn't going to solve anything. So we're going to get into that because WikiLeaks called out Jack Dorsey and basically said, this is cyber feudalism, what you've done to Milo, banning him for basically giving a bad Ghostbusters movie review while allowing Leslie Jones to continue her behavior, even though she's provably engaged in inciting targeted harassment of other Twitter users. We'll be back after the break with Chuck Johnson of GotNews.com. Don't go away. We are back on the Alex Jones Show. We got the breaking news out of Germany again. 3 gunmen on the loose. They're talking about 10 to 15 people dead. They haven't caught the gunmen. There's some stupid report out there saying that, I'm sorry to laugh, but the media falls for this every single time, that Samuel Heidberg, a German nationalist, is the shooter. Well, that's a hoax that happens after every terror attack or mass shooting, that Sam Hyde or Samuel Heidberg is the culprit. But it's being seriously reported by numerous media outlets, even though it's a known hoax that happens after every single shooting. But we'll continue to give you details on that as they come in. But I want to encourage you to go over to InfoWarsLife.com because, again, to get all these special exclusive reports, to get our reporters out there on the ground confronting the regressive left, confronting the social justice warrior disease that's out there taking over the American streets, we need your support. And that's why we've been so successful in taking on and demolishing the leftist narrative in recent months. Again, through your support, buying the products at InfoWarsLife.com, we've got Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink. It's back in stock. The affordable and great tasting Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix is back in stock at InfoWarsLife.com. And it is loaded with a full month supply of essential vitamins, minerals, and amino acids that your body needs. God forbid we would sell vitamin products and things that are actually good and healthy for you. Perhaps we should just be funded by billionaire globalists like George Soros, or take ads from giant transnational pharmaceutical companies like CNN. Maybe that would make us credible. But we've really excelled in recent months through your support by getting the products at InfoWarsLife.com. So Vitamin Mineral Fusion is back in stock. We're talking to Chuck Johnson of GotNews.com. Of course, the censorship war against conservatives has accelerated over the past few days with the banning of Milo Yiannopoulos, the permanent lifetime ban from Twitter for simply saying that the star of Ghostbusters was, quote, barely literate, which is a fact. She is barely literate. He gave a bad review of the movie. Some other people tweeted some racist comments at her, and then they blamed Milo. Like Beyonce is responsible for people tweeting death and rape threats to One Direction fans. Like Justin Bieber is responsible for people who cut themselves. Is DeRay McKesson, is Sean King going to be held responsible for Black Lives Matter supporters who celebrate the deaths of cops on a daily basis? Well, no, because it's one rule for them and another for the rest of us. Chuck, we got a couple of minutes in this segment, long segment coming up in the next section. But you were one of the first prominent, if not the first prominent conservative to be banned by Twitter a year ago now. I think you came back recently, but they got you again. It's like whack-a-mole for them. Before we get into Milo, tell us what happened when you were banned by Twitter a year ago.
Yeah, sure. I was soliciting funds to do a research project on DeRay McKesson, who is the founder of Black Lives Matter, who's been linked to the Nation of Islam, who has a long history of sort of anti-white behavior, and actually pro-white behavior earlier on in his life. And so I was going to just do an investigation. I used to raise lots of money through Twitter from my followers. But of course, I got my account suspended, and I've had my accounts more or less suspended for journalism. I mean, I had it suspended when I broke Jackie Coakley. Jackie Coakley's name. She's the woman behind the University of Virginia rape hoax, and people know that I was using Twitter and my account GotNews.com /donate to give me money to do research, and Twitter suspended me without any explanation. They still haven't said what happened. And I woke up the next morning and I had CNN say that I was trying to assassinate a civil rights leader. That was the argument that they made about a metaphor I used to describe DeRay McKesson. And of course, we now know McKesson has been instigating riots across the country. And so, of course, it's very disturbing. And I told Milo 4 days before he was suspended that he was going to be next, and they would suspend him relatively soon. And we had, we met up the other night and chatted about this issue. And we're going to work together and work with others to make sure that we actually make sure that Twitter, which advertises itself as a free speech platform, Jack Dorsey, of course, and DeRay McKesson, both of whom said that they both said that at Recode that Twitter was for free speech. And yet Milo and I are the obvious examples that that's just not true, that they're liars and that they're fraudsters. And so we have a responsibility to keep telling the truth about these platforms, to regulate them in accordance with our laws, because, of course, they promise free speech. They say that they're a utility. We, of course, regulate utilities in the United States. And so we're getting to an end game right now, a showdown between the new internet, which is more for free expression, more for free ideas, and the old internet, which is a corporate sort of monopolist, globalist platforms that can kick you off for any reason whatsoever.
Okay, hold that thought, Chuck. We'll be back after the break with Chuck Johnson. Stay right there. We are back live on the Alex Jones Show. We're talking to Chuck Johnson, founder and editor of gotnews.com. I'm going to get more into precisely what Chuck does at gotnews.com a little bit later in this segment. But finishing up on Twitter, Chuck, I mean, you said you warned Milo a few days beforehand that he was about to get banned. He said far more offensive, under their own definition, things in the past. He's not been banned. He was briefly suspended a few times. Why ban him now? Do you think there's anything in the timing here?
Well, I think the strategy was to ban him ahead of the RNC, which would be a larger media moment, media narrative. And so they thought he would just go away. Of course, it ended up trending on Twitter that he was banned. But my thinking is that there's a sort of anti-white business model behind Twitter that one really has to contend with if one's honest about it. That almost all of the people who get suspended are white. Nearly no blacks, with the exception of Exelia Banks, who proves the rule. So yeah, there's a serious problem. There's a serious problem at Twitter. It's an anti-white problem, and of course, the fact that Milo was criticizing a black comedian is a problem for these people. I mean, DeRay McKesson, working with Jack Dorsey, has tried to make Twitter, the blackest social network, even more welcoming of things like Black Lives Matter, which is arguably, as you've argued and others have argued, a terrorist organization, certainly an anti-police organization. And so this is going to continue. I was the first one. I was warning people for years that this was coming, that this fight was coming, and now it's here. And it's been quite exciting to see people join in the fight. And I have not gone back on Twitter. I've actually encouraged anyone who wants to create a Chuck Johnson Twitter account, who wants to join my research group, editor@gotnews.com, to email me and they can go and create their own Twitter accounts, because there's really no way to police this. I mean, if thousands of people created Chuck Johnson accounts or Milo Yiannopoulos accounts, we would sort of overwhelm the system, and they would have to every day spend time trying to find and shut down our accounts. Of course, in my particular case, they've IP blocked my home, which has caused tension for people I've taught how to use Twitter, because their accounts have been suspended as well. But they're very draconian, and it's never really going to stop until we win in the court of either the legal courts or in the court of public opinion. And of course, Twitter's stock has been hammered. After I got kicked off, the stock was trading at $45, $50 a share. It's now down to 18. At one point, it was at a low of 14. And I suspect Milo, that which Milo and I and others are planning, will probably bring it still further down.
Now, we hear this narrative over and over again? Twitter's a private company. It can ban whoever it likes. For sure, if they started banning Black Lives Matter accounts, those people would be out on the streets within hours. Some of them would probably be rioting if that was the new policy that Twitter instituted. Why are leftists suddenly all concerned about, the rights of private companies, so long as they only apply to censoring conservatives on platforms like Twitter?
Well, I mean, the issue is very simple. If you make fun of or you cause trouble with somebody at Twitter who, or you're somebody who's a friend of somebody at Twitter, that's how they'll suspend you. It's essentially a super PAC operating, a liberal super PAC operating as a publicly traded company, and it's a form of shareholder fraud. Um, and I think it's a matter of time before somebody files a shareholder lawsuit against the company on these grounds because the company is essentially collapsed in value. But no, my issue is Jack Dorsey raised money from Silicon Valley, and you could read it for yourself in the great book Hatching Twitter by Nick Bilton. He said that Twitter was a utility. He compared it to electricity and to water or the internet. These are things that are extremely important to understand. The phone company doesn't have a right to shut off my phone if they don't like what I'm saying. They don't get to turn off my power if they don't like what I'm doing on the internet. They don't get to shut off my water, those sorts of things. Those are things we associate with the third world. And yet that's this sort of this idea that we can just shut down accounts without any due process. I mean, that's the thing that really bothers me. There's no due process at all. You can't even explain to them, hey, I think this is a misunderstanding, because they won't even take your phone call. They won't even respond to letters from lawyers. They won't even respond to anything really. And so we need to start protesting on Twitter. We can't really create our own networks because who's going to fund it? Silicon Valley is so left wing that they're targeting gay billionaire geniuses like Peter Thiel for having the temerity to support Donald Trump. This society that we've entered into, this sort of future that we've entered into, is one where there are rules for the powerful people and there are no rules. You can do pretty much anything. I mean, I have had people show up at my home with weapons. I've had people threaten to kill me. I've had all manner of terrible things happen to me on Twitter. And some of them I've reported to law enforcement, but the overwhelming majority of the leftist violence, the overwhelming majority of the violence comes exclusively from the left.
And again, they want to be treated as a public utility, as they said. So they can't claim all this private company. It just doesn't apply. They're working with governments. You've got Twitter working with governments across Europe to hunt down people who make comments critical of their government's migration policies. So you cannot make that argument when Twitter itself begins to function as an organ of government, it just doesn't apply anymore. But of course, when Christian bakeries refuse service to gays for gay wedding cakes, that's horrible. But Muslims can do the same thing, and leftists don't really care about it. So again, it's this selectively applied outrage that we see from the left every single time. And it's really coming to a head now with the banning of Milo. This is going to kick off a bigger wave, a bigger movement. As you said, I don't think the solution is simply to create more networks because, unfortunately, all our content, as Drudge warned, has been segregated into these social media ghettos. Social media now is becoming the internet. So the next stage is probably to start to restrict actual internet access for thought criminals like us. That's what they want to do later on down the line. But let's get into Black Lives Matter because, of course, we've had numerous shootings over the past few weeks inspired by extremist Black Lives Matter rhetoric. Yet polls still show that 42% of Americans support this movement compared to only 22% who oppose it. I think this is just the fact that people are generally ignorant. They're ignorant that the ideological inspiration behind this movement is a convicted cop killer on the FBI's most wanted domestic terrorist list. They cause more violence, they cause more division, more black people are being killed by other black people since Black Lives Matter started, because we have this Ferguson effect of cops abandoning crime areas in major cities because they're afraid of the consequences of actually doing their job. Chuck, how do we eviscerate this narrative that's been backed up by the media that Black Lives Matter has the moral high ground when it clearly doesn't?
Well, we've tried to solve this problem at Got News by working. People send us the police reports. They send us more information about these shootings. I personally at one point sued to get Michael Brown's juvenile records. Those records are now being used in a wrongful death lawsuit with the city of Ferguson. So people have to fight. They have to go in, the people will become the media over time. And so everyday researchers, everyday people are taking time out of their day to send me material that they find, social media accounts and so forth. I mean, we reported Philando Castile was Crip, that Elton Sterling was a Blood, And these are all sort of gangbangers who are at war with the police. The criminal element is a serious problem. And we need to just talk openly and seriously about it.
And let's get more into that, because this is the process that you go through at Got News. This is what makes your content really exclusive, really interesting. You're able to subvert that media narrative within hours, sometimes within minutes of one of these stories breaking. So you get an Alton Sterling style situation. Of course, Black Twitter immediately tries to own the narrative, claiming he was a gentle giant, he was a family man. How are you able to overturn that narrative? Because you dig in immediately to get to the bottom of this. Just walk us through the process of how you subvert that narrative.
Sure. So we have 6,000 researchers and counting, people from all over the world sending us material in real time whenever there's a shooting. And they're just simply faster than the corporate media, which is limited in its number of employees, limited in the number of people who work for it. So people send me material all the time. Police officers send me material, police officers' wives, and so forth. And so what we're able to do is we're able to publish this material and people can see for themselves. Like in the case of Michael Brown, we published the material showing that far from being a gentle giant, his Instagram revealed a young man who likes to beat up women. And so, which of course was later corroborated, that kind of character was corroborated by the assault, strong arm robbery he had against that store clerk. Look, I mean, people are starting to wake up. They're starting to gradually realize that this narrative of police officers hunting down black babies and black children and harming them is just not true. And so what happens is that the leftist media sort of slowly loses credibility. And as they lose credibility, people go to places like InfoWars, like gotnews.com, like my news site Researcher, and they go and they put up their money, they put up their labor, and they really want to get to the essence of things. And it's so exciting to go and debunk claims in real time because it shows that the people can have more power than the corporate media. And the most important thing you can do is just ignore these attempts to portray these people as these gangbangers, as nice family men. I mean, in the case of Alton Sterling, he was a child rapist, and yet we're supposed to pretend that he was a good family man. I mean, it's insane.
Now, I see you as a kind of Andrew Breitbart figure. You understand that it's not only about overturning the general narrative with these leftists, but it's about tearing down their icons individually. And you do it through completely legal means. But of course, if you take on these people on an individual basis, that opens you up to dirty tricks, to attacks. But what drives you on to expose these people? I know this is a kind of tactic you use to take them down individually. What motivates you in the final equation to take on these hypocrites as you do?
Well, I'm very anti-fraud, and I feel if I didn't do it, no one else would, which is, I think, the best reason to start a business. You sort of want a de facto monopoly. But I think it's important. I mean, I have the skill sets, and I train people all the time. And people have been gracious enough to give me money through my website. They've been gracious enough to join my fight. And now it's become their fight. I mean, many of the tactics I have used now other sites are using, so I can move on to other things. And so, what motivates me? I mean, I'm a believer. My view is, you shall know the truth, and it shall set you free, which is my favorite line of scripture. And so, I am very, very serious about ending the three frauds of our time: media, education, and government, and working to make those things work for people rather than for their leaders or for sort of a larger kind of globalist class of rulers. So I'm very insistent on it, and I think journalists have a responsibility to the truth, and it's very sad how in recent years nihilists have won out. But fortunately, we've had many victories, such as what's happening to Gawker right now, where it's imploding, and Nick Denton himself, the proprietor of it, may go bankrupt for essentially publishing revenge porn. And so we are turning a corner on some of these larger issues. I mean, Trump has been very effective at undermining the credibility of the media, which of course they've done themselves, but he has been very good about pointing out how dishonest they are.
Okay, final comments, and just direct people to where they can find your content.
Sure, I'm very grateful to Alex Jones. I think he paved the way on a lot of these issues. It's been interesting watching in real time how events have vindicated a lot of what he's said over the years. And people want to join me, they can come over to gotnews.com. They can email me at editor@gotnews.com. they want to give me money, it's gotnews.com/donate, and I will be a careful steward with it and just put the money back into the website and back into the research.